All right. As introduced, my name is Zinhle Nigati, and I am going to be presenting on behalf of KZN South African Planning Institute. I'm also joined in by Mr. Praveen Amar Singh, who's also going to be part of the discussion for this topic, which is establishing community partnership, a challenge for planning practitioners. So as we said that this breakaway session is more an interactive engagement, we'll be sharing a presentation where we would like everyone to engage and share their opinions based on the topic at hand. And then we'll just, at the end of the presentation, we are just going to outline the key outcomes based on the discussion. All right, so as a point of departure, we have found it fit to explain the defining terms before we get right into the presentation. So we have identified three key terms in terms of community partnership, participation, and stakeholder engagement. So for the actual topic itself, community partnership, what is defined, it is a collaborative relationship. So it's the willingness between the entities to actually form and address a shared objective based on a particular development or a particular project. So these effective partnerships, they leverage the strength of each partner to address the issues at hand. So it's more of a collaborative.
Sorry, Zinhle, the slides are not being reflected. Right, we got it. Now we got it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right. As explained, our point of departure is to define the terms that we've identified fit for this discussion. So just to reiterate, we've identified community partnership, community participation, and stakeholder engagement. You find that a lot of the times these terms are used interchangeably, or they probably mean the same thing, but actually they mean different meanings towards it. So community partnership is more of like a collaborative relationship. So it's between entities that are actually willing to be or partake in certain developments with a shared objective. And then when we look at community participation, it is more of like a process by which all stakeholders or the community want to actually mobilize resources and really take responsibility for the development at hand, and obviously to share in the decision making and implementation of the actual program or project at hand. Then we look at stakeholder engagement. It's more of like an interactive discussion where there are identified groups of a particular nature and in respect to the project at hand that really raise their concerns pertaining to the actual development. So this is usually undertaken in a way through interviews, surveys, or group discussions or public meetings, just to make sure that the key stakeholders are well informed before the project takes on the decision-making process. So moving on, we've also identified the key policies that really speak to partnership. So we've identified three within the context of South Africa. The first one being the National Development Plan. So this National Development Plan really advocates for building sustainable communities. And through this, they're really putting forth how partnership is also considered very important in terms of planning, and as well as putting the interest of the key stakeholders into consideration when it comes to planning at an intergovernmental level as well. And then when we look at your integrated urban development framework, it also advocates for strengthening partnership. But for this, it's more of like a short to medium policy priority. So it's not really a long-term, objective. So what they're saying is that it's really like for partners to really engage with municipalities, as well as communities and civil society, to really be part of the spatial planning discussion and decision making. So they're really advocating for collaborative decision making within this policy. And then when we look into spatial planning, we look at the Spatial Planning Land Use Management Act, which is SPLUMA, which is a normative framework and a tool that provides for inclusivity at all spheres of the government. So here we just wanted to share the key policies that really try and touch base on community partnership as the topic for discussion. So some of the questions that we want you guys to also take into consideration or to think about throughout this discussion is that, are partnerships being built in a meaningful way that benefit the people? Should we engage communities? So by this, we're saying that as professionals that studied, you know, you pay professional indemnity insurance, and are you really prepared to hand over the project to communities to run? And so today, based on these questions, we also want to further explore from the engagement is, are partnerships really necessary in planning? And why should we actually partner with communities? Is it a legal compliance or tokenism, or is it really meaningful for them to participate? And can we really do so, or are we caught in the whole populism in actually having to really involve the community in the projects or certain developmental projects at hand? And then how should we optimally partner with communities? What are the real opportunities that are presented out there for them to actually be a part of the development? And then we move on to actually asking ourselves, what is the real situation in South Africa when it comes to partnership? We also want to find out what is the situation in other countries as well in terms of community partnership, so that we can all, you know, engage and understand what is really taking place when we look at community partnership. Moving on, so what we've also identified as a normative framework for public participation is what is known as the spectrum of public participation, which has been developed by the International Association of the Public Participation. So it's your Iap2. So this spectrum has basically been put forth to help clarify the role of the community in planning and decision making. And mainly, how is the community influenced in the planning and decision making processes when it comes to engagement, really being involved in the developments at hand. And this spectrum that we have sourced out is also speaking to the interest and how it's designed to assist with the selection of the level of participation, to really basically understand what is the public's role when you undertake a participation process, and which I'll be explaining in the following slide in terms of the different levels that they've put forth. So what we understand this Iap2 Spectrum is that it's an international body of language for public participation and also community engagement. And what we're saying is that it also provides a normative framework that is worth considering, and where we find is that partnership may fit into one of the spectrums, or at some hand it may overlap, which I will further elaborate. So as I just mentioned now, we're looking at what we call the Iap2 spectrum. So this table basically gives us an indication of how to do about with participation or engagement with the community. So in the columns at the top, we have inform. So that is to inform the public, to provide a balanced objective. It's more of like really coming in as a developer and saying, hey, listen, this is what we have going on. This is the objective of the project, and this is what we intend to do. And then moving on to consult, this is basically to obtain like feedback based on the project that has been put forth, the analysis that have been undertaken. So then we come together into public meetings, and then this is where we consult, and the key stakeholders of the community therefore provides what their feedback based on what has been presented. And then we move to involve. So involve is basically to work directly with the stakeholders, basically raising your concerns that need to be on the same level of understanding when undertaking a particular project. And then when we move to collaborate, this is more of like partnership with the stakeholders. So them also being part of the making decisions and really identification of certain solutions that can be put forth by both the community and the developer at hand. And then the last tool or goal is to empower. This is basically to actually say, you know what, we're allowing you, the community, to have the final decision making and basically to take ownership of this project at hand. This is basically to also give in a huge contribution by the community at hand based on the project. So as you look at the table, after the goals, we have what they said, the promise to the public. So this is the medium and how they're going to undertake participation within each of the tools presented. So for inform, it's basically we keep you informed. To consult, we will keep you informed, listen and acknowledge concerns, obviously providing feedback. And then for the involvement part is that we will work with you to ensure that your concerns and aspirations are directly reflected. And then to collaborate is basically to look, we'll look to you for advice and innovation in terms of any solutions that the community may provide. And then to empower is we will implement what you decide and we'll support your the actions and solutions that have been presented. So this is basically an idea of what as developers and planning practitioners can actually implement when wanting to, you know, really engage with the community through partnership and really participate on a very intense level. So the next column is the tools that can be used in terms of each of the participation levels. So for inform, some of them are you know, similar, but for inform you can actually use newsletters, circulars like your gazettes, or you can have like a website to basically inform the community. And then in terms of consultation, that's where you bring in your focus groups, your surveys, your public meetings, your webinars if need be. And then to involve, that's where you have your interactive workshop discussions and your forums as well. And to collaborate, we're also saying that you can use focus groups as well, also to be facilitate like a very consensus building forum to actually come up with decisions that are going to influence both the community and the developer. And then to empower is mainly the dialogue with the government or the key stakeholders to say that this is the final decision that is being made, and we are going to inform the joint planning provisions or the local governance provisions. So moving on from the spectrum, what we've drawn up is a little diagram to just explain the different participation levels. And we're asking ourselves, so where does community partnership fit in? So to inform, as you can see, it's mainly the developer or the project proponent to basically inform the community, as previously explained. And then to consult, it's more of like a two-way engagement where you have your community and your developer really engaging on the issues and shared concerns. And then when you involve, that's when you see as the community is actually really being part of the project itself and actually working directly with the developer. And then when we move to collaborate, here is where you can see that there's actual partnership taking place in terms of decision making. So this is where there's intense interaction between the community and the developer or the project proponent. And then when we move to empower, that's where you see that the community itself has been given the platform to make final decision makings in terms of the actual projects at hand. And this is where the developer steps back a bit and allows the community to, you know, really find out all the decision making tools. So I've come to the end of my presentation, and would like to start with the engagement. And this is the question that we're putting out there is, what are the challenges and strategies for fostering successful partnership between planners and the community? I'd like to get like a response to any of the questions that have been raised. I don't know if Praveen, you want to say anything.
No, that's fine. I think let's take questions, but even points of clarity. I think the real intent here was for us to provide an introduction and not to provide answers, because it's an intent to engage more than anything else. Yeah. So let's open the webinar for discussion, rather.
I think if we just go back to the questions that we have posed out, you know, during the presentation, I think maybe we can, as a start, to really get insights from the participants based on these questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the insights. I think it's really good that we actually speak about these things, and that we actually look at the way that we interact with as planners with the community when we do put out policies and plans. As it is probably at the moment, is that it's something that's advertised. It's somewhere in a room, and there's no real interaction. And I liked the table that you had to show the different levels. The question that I want to put forward is, what is your suggestion with regard to incorporating this in the legislation and in the processes? Because it's one thing to have that, but we know how our lawyers are, and we know how our communities are sometimes. If it's not done in terms of legislation, they don't do it, and then I think we're not going to achieve what we are trying to set out in this presentation. So how do we then, or what's a suggestion then to make sure that it is actually put into legislation so that one can actually achieve what we want to achieve here?
Martin, I think that's, if I can come in, sorry, Sinjle, before you. I think I've seen there's about 26 participants, and they are from a range of other places, other sectors, etc., and even the international sector. Perhaps we can open the question before we give our ideas on it, so that it's not about our ideas against the other ideas. So I don't know if anyone else in the group wants to answer that question. And to summarize, so what Martin is basically saying, Martin is from SACPlan, okay, he's the registrar, and he's basically saying that how do we incorporate these, the spectrum as well as community participation in a meaningful way, and partnerships in a meaningful way, in the policy formulation in the country, right? Anyone?
Hi guys, if I can jump in. So my name is Samantha. I'm not actually based in South Africa. I know this is a very South Africa-centric webinar, but I'm based in the Philippines in Southeast Asia with, I guess, not that different a context. And I think what my ad would be in relation to a lot of what's been brought up, as well as what Martin has just asked, is around agile working. So essentially taking inspiration from IT and software development. Placemaking is the start of agile in a sense of how do we build on iterations. And so I think the question that follows on for me around a lot of these things in terms of how do we get started, right? How do we know what works and what doesn't? I think for me, it's a lot about iteration, and it's a lot about how authorities are paying attention to these iterations, even though they might look really small. But there's a lot to be picked up in terms of how local communities actually want to interact with the authorities, want to interact with designers, want to interact with other neighboring communities, for example. And I think through these little tests, you start to find unique ways that, you know, one particular city wants to operate and another particular city wants to operate. And from those scales, then you start to build up a national sort of understanding of different cities and different regions and how they want to operate. So that's my share. I'd like to invite Ronaldo as well, if he's in our group, because he left some messages on the chat, which I think are quite relevant.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from the Philippines. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry for that. I thought the chat box is somehow for our group room number 3, but anyway, it's in the plenary. I stress out about, I think the first stage, which is inform, is very important for the community to participate. If the community is not well informed, then it's very, very difficult for us to move on with collaboration and empowerment and ownership. So I think the first stage is really very important and crucial for us to generate a good partnership with the community. I think the first stage, which is inform, is really crucial and relevant to get a very productive and a public partnership and collaboration. Otherwise, if the community is not well informed with the project, particularly in the local government governance, then it's very futile to get a good collaboration. That's it, and thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Stephanie
Yeah.
Chetty from the National Department of Cooperative Governance here in South Africa. Thank you so much, Zinhle and colleagues, for the presentation. I think it was really informative. I don't want to start my video. Is it okay if I leave it off? Thanks. So I just wanted to say it's really great to have this conversation around partnerships. From a national government perspective, what we've seen is that partnerships are meaningful, especially if it has the right voices. When there's a lack of the right people in the room, then it's more of a dictatorship than a partnership. And I think COVID-19 has exposed us to the fact that we can see the issues and the challenges that we are facing with as a country. We can see the inequalities and the marginalization that still further persist. But what we've also seen is that through this, it's given a partnership and a voice to everybody in all of society, because it has no restriction on the rich, the poor, the marginalized, or any inequalities. So what we've seen is that in order to strengthen partnerships, we need to activate community voices, especially particularly in women and children. I know from the IUDF, the Integrated Urban Development Framework, it's a policy framework to address spatial transformation and urbanization. It speaks to particularly policy lever 7 on empowered active communities. And we're using this opportunity to engage, to strengthen partnerships. We've seen that in South Africa, it is a bit weak, especially from a civil society. There's an issue of trust versus contractual obligations and agreements. But when we find that when community comes in, we actually work together, we have better outcomes. And one is able to implement policy projects much, much, much better. So that's my contribution for partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you.
Zinhle, if you can go to the slide prior to this, because we deliberately actually included a very provocative question. Okay, so the one relating to we are the professionals, so why should we actually consult? So our thought when Zinhle and I we were thinking about preparing this presentation was that when we have been engaged and I work with Zinhle as well in community projects, quite a number of the politicians and the community leaders, we are in a province where tribal leadership is quite big. The nature of the area is relatively rural once you get outside of the city of Durban, and very few visitors actually know that. But it's the nature of our spatial arrangement in the country. There's a stark reality between urban and rural. And there are some arrangements, and particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, we've got something called the Nyama Trust Board. Oh, and we also have a king. We have a king in the province, although there are kings elsewhere. This king is actually legislated, it's entrenched within the parliamentary structures in government. And that's very important. But that king also has access to over 3 million hectares of land. Okay, so what we find is that within the politicians, particularly because their argument, and some of the councillors as well, you get that within the argument, is that they've been elected by the people, and therefore, except for the ward committees and the political parties that they need to consult, they don't really need to consult wider than that. And there appears to be some thought, even with some professionals, is that we're the ones who train. We have our master's degrees. If we are private companies, we carry the professional indemnity. So we are willing to come and inform you in terms of the spectrum of what we are doing. But there's no way we're going to go with collective decision making, because the final indemnity, the final liability lies with us. So that was the reason that we put that question there. We toiled. We're the ones who studied for 6 years, if you're doing a master's, okay? We're the ones paying the indemnity. We're the one taking the risk. So why should we actually have these partnerships with these projects? But that also forces us to say, what is it that we want in these partnerships? And I think, in terms of the trajectory in South Africa, everyone knows, we had a very great democracy, a very great statesman in the former Nelson Mandela, and everyone was talking about things. There was a great program called Reconstruction and Development Program. It was equated to the New Deal after the post-war, World War reconstruction and development in terms by Roosevelt and the others in the UK, Churchill, etc. And everything was going to be fine. And all of that was going to be based and underpinned by partnerships. But where we are currently, if people want to be honest, and a lot of you guys are from COCTA and from government, is that we've not got to that point. In fact, what we found is that with that zeitgeist and political concept of, we've been elected and therefore we should decide, it's taken a very ugly and dark side. The theme today is the bright side of planning. And the dark side is reflected and manifested itself in corruption. And with that comes patronage. So the partnership is very, very selective. It is party political partnerships. It is family-related partnerships. So that's why we that's why we included that question. So I don't know what people feel as professionals. And is there a level in which we go to communities and say, we're partnering with you? So we're happy, because developers don't do that, because developers come in, they're putting in the money, they want a particular return, and they're not, for argument's sake, is now going to say, we're going to densify this housing project to double the amount because the community tells us so, okay? Or we're actually going to go for less, because that will impact on the bottom line, okay? But that also compromises other issues, such as environmental issues, where communities do say, we want more homes, and therefore, we will actually build in the floodplain. We've been actually in the floodplain before. Okay? So I don't know what people's thoughts are that, we can go on ad infinitum discussing the various examples from our experiences, but perhaps if we can get input from others. Thank you.
Okay, just to add, I think in respect to built environment professionals, wanting to partner with communities. I think, I don't know, I stand to be corrected, but my suggestion would probably be that as a professional, maybe you would approach the community, for a particular project and underline all the issues that are pertaining to that, let's say if it's a housing project like Praveen said, maybe as a professional, before you actually engage with community, to undertake and underpin all the underlying issues and present them to the community and say, listen, this is the underlying issues that we have for this area or for the planned project, so that there is no like conflicting interest of maybe will you find that your ward councillor is like, no, I want houses to be built here because we want them here. So maybe as professionals, we can actually approach it in such a way where we say, listen, these are the underlying issues that we have in this particular area for this particular project. So that yeah, they're actually well aware or well informed that what you can do and what you cannot do. So I don't know, I think maybe if as professionals we come with that approach and say, these are the underlying issues and this is the solution, what do you guys think? You know, we wouldn't want you to build or construct houses on a floodplain, because it will obviously come back to the government. So here we are saying that this is how it is, maybe show like a visual image of the actual land in question, so that they actually see what they will be dealing with if they go ahead with the housing project, for example. So I think yeah, that's just my 2 cents based on that. I don't know if anyone else.
Hello, hi, I'm from India. And with respect to the question which was posed by the presenter in the last slide, that what are the challenges or strategies in public participation which may be faced by an urban planner or a planner, what I think is that one of the major challenges, especially with context of India, is in public participation, is how we can reduce the digital divide. Because with the increasing boom of ICT, information and communication technology, and where everyone is talking about e-governance to involve more and more people in various forms, maybe in terms of collaborate, or maybe in terms of just asking their concerns and suggestions. A very important question is that, are we reaching to all sections of the society? Because in most cases, especially in context of India, when they talk about such tools, when they talk about such technology, it's usually the elite part of the society which is really able to put on their concerns and convey their issues. But the section which is actually the one which is struggling through is not even allowed to raise their voice, or it's not sometimes intentionally done. Sometimes they don't have access to such services. So I think this is a major problem which is faced by planners, because their intention may be that they want to use such tools to know the concerns of the people of all sections, of all stakeholders, but they may not have access to. From both sides, the people may not have even the basic knowledge. Even if they have access to the services, they may not have the knowledge to use it. They may not have the proper education. So yeah, that's what I think is one of the major challenges, which can be converted into one of the major strategy to enhance public participation at different levels. Thank you.
Cheers. And if I could build on that as well. So that's part of the contextual challenge for me, and linking that to what Pravin had mentioned around this leadership piece, essentially. So it's like, if you have studied and you have, worked in your career and you got to this point where you understand a lot of things, or you become this expert, then how do you move away from I know best and towards this understanding that not only does the community know better than me, because it's their place, but it's also they're the end user that I should be designing for, right? So this is I think around this, and architects have this even to a more extreme degree. So it's not just a planning thing, but I think this aspect of leadership was also brought up the last conversation. The dark side came into the fore when we talk about what is it that we know best? And in a sense, it's around how do planners step into their roles as facilitators. So it's not just facilitating information, because obviously planners understand how, the laws work and what can be done, what can't be done, and the challenges that are facing us in the future and currently, and the solutions or design solutions that work or don't work and why, and the community doesn't. So it's more about, in my view, facilitation and building up those leadership skills to enable both sides to complement each other. I think it's a really important aspect of it. And when we talk about facilitation, then we could go back to, the point that was made previously by Ria around how is it that we are doing these things at scale, and technology is very much a part of that, especially in places like India and definitely in Manila, where we have, these are mega cities that suffer from a lot of inequality in terms of the elite having what they want and the rest of the people not. So I think these challenges are all for me around leadership and around, I think the question really that comes up is why are we not teaching this in our institutions, in our companies? Because a lot of planners, I don't know if this is what you meant to say, Pravin, but this is definitely my opinion. A lot of planners do come with this attitude that I know everything and I'm the expert, and I've studied a lot, etc. So it's more about, I think, curiosity and facilitation skills to enable planners to really see past that sort of expertise kind of approach and more towards a facilitative, co-creative approach that can actually benefit more people. And that's the end of the day what we go into the entire sector for, right? We want to build future cities that make people happy. So like this is a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Samantha. There's also some discussion in the chat.
Yes, excuse me, if I can step on one moment, I still invite you to write your comments in the chat. I mean, I double check, but we will consider them, and even if maybe not all the points raised will be answered or discussed, we will take them into consideration when we will write the report after the webinar. So don't worry if you can also use the chat as a valuable tool for discussion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Federico. Njabuliso Mdluli wrote in the chat, he said, I think involving the community is important, especially because the development is for the community. For a formalization of informal settlements, I think the community should be involved before the layout plan is done, especially where encroachments are involved. The community should be made aware that their boundaries may change once the township has been formalized. That was one of the chats. Anything else? Stefani Chetty, she just mentioned that it's all about involving the civil society, the public in decision making. So it's active participation versus dictatorship. Trust that the national government must build with all of society. As we enter into the new normal, there are still many past factors that hinder spatial transformation inequalities that exist in South Africa. So for me, partnership and empowering communities are the most important as we transition and move forward. So those are some of the discussions in the chat. I don't know if anyone has anything else in respect to what we have put forth.
Hello, Jay.
Yes.
It's Nokwinama here. I'm sorry for that. I can't find the hand.
Okay.
The hand icon. Okay. So this is Nokwinama. I'm from Kwakta National. I'm currently based in the minister's office, so I deal more with a politician. And going back to the question that Pravin raised in saying, but we are the professionals, we have the experience, we have the educational background to back whatever it is that we are saying. For me, it goes to what do we want to achieve from the partnerships, and also remembering that the partnerships, who is the beneficiary of the end result, and why it is important for us. I think when we currently look at the context of South Africa, we see that we have a number of public protests that are emerging. And for me, those public protests are a serious concern, not only for the planning profession, but also for everyone who is actually involved in the developmental space. From those public protests, you begin to see a cry, you begin to see a disjuncture that exists between those that have been elected into those those that have been elected as public representatives, be it in political leadership spaces, as well as those that are professionals. So you have this disjuncture between the professionals, the elected politicians, as well as the community that is on the ground. And that is a concern, not just for planners, but for everyone who's involved in development space. And therefore, for us as planning professionals, I agree with Samantha that we should not see ourselves as the saviors that have, I don't know, 20 years experience, the savior that has that master's degree from the Ivy League institutions, but we should see ourselves as the enablers as well as facilitators who are there to empower the community, who are also there to build partnerships, not just only for today, but also for tomorrow, because we do not know. COVID-19 has just exposed different things that today, one thing can be like this, tomorrow we'll have a different new normal. So you need to have those partnerships so that even for tomorrow, you can still continue to build from those partnerships, continue to work from those partnerships. And for me, so that's where it is that as planners, we should see ourselves as the enablers, as well as facilitators, as well as empower communities, those who will be the beneficiaries. Those are the ones that will be having to live with this project, having to live with whatever decisions that we've made. So yeah, that's what I just wanted to end. Thank you.
Okay. Praveen, do you want to respond? I think you're on mute.
No, that's fine. I think, part of these discussions are not to provide answers, because there's no correct answers. Okay, these are debates and discussions for engagement. And when individual people leave these webinars, just like when they finish their training and their courses, it is the work that they do at the coalface that either test the theory that we learn, the debates that we have. So I don't think there's a correct answer. When you are faced with a practical problem, then the manner in which you raise it, the manner in which you actually address this, based on our debates and discussions and theories, will validate even our beliefs, when we get there. So remember, these questions are all to get options and discussions going. Yeah. But yeah, I think generally, there is an agreement that professionals have got to embed themselves within society, and therefore within community at a local level, right? Certainly at the planning field, because planning, there's large debates about where it is, but planning is part of the social sciences, and some of the universities do locate them within that spectrum. There are very few institutions or people who hold the belief that planning is actually a technical thing, such as engineering. So engineer can, well, some time ago, they could argue, we understand the strength, the structural strength of a bridge. So we don't, and we will not consult on whether the bridge, how long a bridge is, how high, and how strong, because the trigonometry of that gives us the strength, and the structural integrity. But certainly from our side, there's quite a lot of uncertainties, and because we plan for people, and I say this not as a platitude, because we know that particularly in democracies, and coming from the history of sort of postmodernist or modernist societies, so whether it was the old communism and the way the Americas used to be and where they're getting back to right now, is that it is about partnerships with people, meaningful partnerships, not for the sake of saying the environmental regulations prescribe that we need to engage with people. The Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act says we must have partnerships. So we'll have a meeting. We'll try to have we'll have the minutes as a proof that a meeting took place, just like we need to provide proof of an advertisement when we undertake a town planning application, because those are all technical requirements. I think what's far more important is that it's got to be meaningful, and then people got to be committed to it. If not, then the planners who don't want to, then should actually reserve themselves to being planning administrators. And I have a harsh view of this, is that go to a municipality and print out zoning certificates and maps for the other planners who want to basically engage with communities in a meaningful way. Because I think what Samantha says is that if we don't have the philosophy in our minds that we are here to improve the cities so that people can actually enjoy the city, can enjoy the spaces, can call their homes and where they live places and claim them as their own so that they enjoy it. And this is with everyone, whether it's the homeless, whether it's the vulnerable, whether it's the poor, whether it's women and children. So, we deal with issues of safety in a way in which women do not feel unsafe going out at 6 p.m. In the dark, because that's the situation in South Africa. Now, what are planners doing to actually reverse that? Yeah. Thanks. Other inputs, perhaps?
Okay, there's a chat from Keta Kant. She says, what if inform became envision with the community? What if we actively saw ourselves as professionals that are there to be resources and agents for the change communities see for themselves or need lessons to see need for change? So I think she's referring to the Iap2 Spectrum, and she's saying that what if we put in place envision instead of inform as part of the Iap2 Spectrum.
I think I wanted to add as well, it's a sign of the times. I don't think any sort of top-down decisions are really well accepted anymore. And I myself am a design engineer, for example. So in the past, definitely last generation engineering, it would just be like, well, this is the limitation of engineering, so we can't do anything else. So we can't ask for opinions because we can't do anything else. But today we have, a lot more sort of new methods, new technologies, and new materials to work with. And it's the same in the case of planning as well. So I think in every sector, we're at the stage where it's about purpose. It's not because, it's not doing just because we can do it, but it's around what purpose are we embedding in what we're doing? And does that purpose actually serve the greater community that we want to serve? Or is that even our purpose? And if not, then why? Because are we not humans?
Mm-hmm. We have until 5 to 12 before we leave the group discussion. So we still got time to discuss, unless if everyone feels comfortable with the discussion that has been put in.
Well, I'm interested to see the other questions. Maybe we can focus on another question that might bring up something else.
Okay. So we obviously engaged on the professional indemnity question, and one of the questions that I think we also need to tap into is why should we partner with communities, or how should we optimally partner with them?
Yeah, I love that question, how. I think we kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier with this technology question, for example. So would be really interested to hear, especially, data and different kinds of surveys in COVID-friendly world, what that sort of looks like and how that informs us. I would be interested to see what people think about that.
Okay, within the chat, Yokundu Guyai from SACN basically just said that this is definitely a layered conversation, but for me, the challenges include the relationship between government and civil society. Most civil society views of their government is negative. So there needs to be a faith in government if it's needed, or is he saying that government too needs to build trust to encourage civil society to engage? So he or she, I'm not too sure, is basically saying that there needs to be a trust between the government and the civil society. Hence why you see why you have your civil strikes as well. Maybe the society has lost interest in the government. That's why you see why there are strikes that are happening within most of the countries and within the developmental space. So, and then Reynolds is also saying that data sharing is quite a challenge, especially from the side of political leaders, if we speak about technology as well.
Hi, colleagues. My name is Suraksha Ishwardat. I'm a young planner. So one of my observations in public participation has been the, how can I say, the disconnection between the education and the practical side of planning and public participation. So there was one experience that I had, and this is based on the theories that we learn at our universities. It's not very much, it doesn't teach you the fact that, you know, there's going to be some complication in public participation. The communities are not going to be very receptive to some of the ideas that you put out. So, and also the processes that you use when you communicate with the communities. So I had a colleague that presented a whole list of the issues that the community had faced, and she wanted to then come up with solutions with the community as an effective way to assist the project and get it to its best, how can I say, its most effective result. So in that, the community did not want to come up with the solutions. They basically said, that's your job now. We gave you the problems, so it's your job to come up with the solutions. And I think in those cases, the education side of planning does not prepare you for that aspect of public participation and public partnerships. So yeah, just bringing it back to how us as planners, we need to be prepared for that, and maybe the education side needs to be strengthened in that aspect of facilitation and public participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Suri. I think you touched on a very important point as well in terms of our education system as well. You know, if we studying planning, which is a social science or, you know, degree of some sort, why are we not being told about community participation and at what level should we really be engaging with the community? Which also brings kind of like a question of mind is, to what extent can we then engage your political engagements, such as your ward councillors? Do we only engage with them when we actually going into the community, or do we involve them as well as representative of the community within the developmental space? You know, I think we also need to unravel that part in terms of, if the ward councillors are representative of the community, should they not be also within the forefront and be involved within the developmental space? I think so.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think at the same time, a lot of these processes and, you know, these towards public participation, they look very good on paper. But when you're out there and it's a practical thing where you are facing the public, it's totally different. So in every situation is different. Every project is different. So as planners, we just need to be well prepared when in any situation. And I think a lot of the colleagues have mentioned that you need to come down to being part of the community and try to understand what are their problems and what solutions might they want, so that you can come up with the best solutions for the project and you know, make it more effective and efficient. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. Just going back to Martin Lewis's question in terms of what suggestions need to be put into legislation, I think from a planning point of view, this is where we say that planners should also be part of the policy decision making and policy, you know, being a part of policy decision making, basically. Planners should also be there to draft up those legislations and say, we need to include the community, you know, under section 2 of what, you know, if there's no planners that are in the board or that are in the decision making policy makers, so who are we planning for if planners are not part of the policy making as well? So I think that should be the main suggestion in terms of legislation. We need to involve more planners in policy making decisions, so that we actually put the interest of the people, you know, ahead and actually become those enablers and facilitators for the people. You know, if it all boils down to legislation being a legal framework, then planners need to also be there and say, hey, there are community people that we're planning for, you know. So I think that would be my response in terms of the suggestions and legislation per se, is to basically put planners also to be part of that discussion in policy making. I'm not too sure if Martin, you want to say anything?
In line with what Suraksha has told about practical implementation of the public participation thing, I wanted to say that there is one more experience which we students or we as young planners face, is that the reluctance of the public. We are asking them for participation, but in most cases they are very reluctant, especially in the rural areas, because they have somewhere a belief in them that how much ever they ask us, it's not going to get implemented. Ultimately, it's going to be a top-down approach. These are maybe just formalities or maybe just some new triggers coming from students, but these are not the people who are going to you know, do anything, develop anything, implement anything. So it has resulted in kind of laid-back attitude within the people, because they don't have so much of encouragement within them that us giving any concerns or raising any issues or giving any suggestions would actually benefit in the real time. So I think that's also, especially this is the issue with women, especially in rural areas, because they are never asked for, firstly. Secondly, even if they're asked for, somewhere they themselves don't have that confidence in them, that their concerns or their ideas will be even taken care of. I think, so if we look at the other side, that means the actual people from whom we are expecting the participation, I think it's really necessary to win their faith through transparency, through governance, all those things. Because if they don't contribute, then this discussion doesn't matter at all. Thank you.
Thank you. There's also some discussion in the chat. Ronaldo says, data sharing is quite a challenge, especially from the side of political leaders. This is the reason why I present case studies to my engineering students to have a better understanding of the project cycle where public consultation is crucial. For example, I do teach environmental engineering and I do present EIS process to a civil engineering class. In addition, as planners should immerse themselves into the community. And then Shivash, she is saying that the communities do not trust politicians, so we must change the mindset that we are representing the government. In this way, communities will trust planners more because essentially we are planning for them. That was the discussion in the chat.
You know, I think in summary, you know, it's almost because it borders onto politics that the planners don't really want to get into the field or the discussion, and then particularly in South Africa, because you know, people, frankly, when it comes to politicians and political stuff, etc., people are not as free to express what they feel, because everybody knows that somewhere along the line you will be victimized. So if you're a private consultant and you're critical of the government, you know, it's very easy for you not to actually get appointments. You know, if you wouldn't, government is actually even worse. And, you know, as planners, we appreciate it with our fellow colleagues. But I think what Suraksha said, I think what the previous speaker said, and I think Samantha as well, but as well as what Shiva spoke about politics. People are touching on it because I think it really is the elephant in the room. It impacts a hell of a lot on planning, and it works in a number of ways. I mean, what Sureksha said is that you go to a community and you say, let's build a partnership. Okay, now I can only talk from my practical experience in the country I work in, okay, which is South Africa. And, you know, everybody knows there was so much of hope. You know, we had a thing called the Reconstruction and Development Program. I told you it's like the New Deal. It was going to be the panacea of everything. You know, we had the greatest statesman who was going to lead us to this Damascus, okay? And right now where we sit, and even a year or two, in fact, 5 years or so, i.e. the second or third term, by the second term of our democracy, all of that is actually withered away, you know, and civil society was, I think, consciously destroyed by the state. They were not given the space to actually operate, same with NGOs, etc. Development became centralized. We went into a neoliberal mode of operation that gave away our rights to develop to international institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF, okay? And I think those are the things. So when Sureksha says you want to go and partner, because people have in their mind the promises that was made that we were all going to be homed. We all were going to get houses. But now you want to go there and talk about whether they actually get a 2-bedroom house or a 3-bedroom house or 1-bedroom house, or only services, the site and service. Then people are saying we are reluctant to actually, we don't want to have this partnership with you anymore. Because you are now not partnering, you're basically coming to talk us down into a compromise. So I think those are also things, and sometimes, especially when it comes to government, and what Shivasha said in the chat, is that the politicians are causing the problem, and we need to perhaps go in as planners so that they separate us as planners from being part of the state if we are state planners. But it's very difficult to do because the promises and the programs are always announced by the politicians. So if people are going around and saying, you know, for COVID, this is what we're going to do, then a politician always thereafter delegated to the bureaucrats and the people who are implementing. And the implementers are going to be the planners, the engineers, the state planners, the state engineers, the state medical doctor. And when they go in there, they find that they're actually constrained because the promises, there's a major gap between promises made by the politicians and what can be realistically delivered in reality. You know, and I've seen like practical situations where politicians promised, a councillor promised homes in a particular place, but when you went there was actually bad geology. You couldn't build a single house. You know, so go now as a planner and tell them, we're not giving you, we're actually giving you zero. Okay, so I think the politics of planning and the role, you know, that the real politics play in our field is quite exciting. I think it's dynamic. It's something that it's a minefield, you know. But I think we need to actually always keep that in cognizance. And it's one of the things when I, you know, got and sometimes we accredit planning schools as part of the Planning Institute. We advise people to the schools to try and have content relating to that. You know, I take the planning students for a day to a community meeting, a packed community meeting where there's no water, no sanitation, okay, where they're talking about the building of a township. And you see the inconvenience for one day of not having sanitation or water. And then you bear in mind that those people have been there for 30 years. Okay? And that brings the stark reality of planning to the real politic. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Praveen. Ronaldo in the chat has said that in my experience at the local government, planners are hired by political leaders as consultants and they are paid for their political interest. Okay. Wow. I don't know if Ronaldo, you want to elaborate maybe on this?
Okay. Good afternoon again. I think it's quite very, what do you call it, a sensitive issue considering, in my experience in the Philippines, and mostly political leaders, you try to acknowledge that they have no technical know-how in terms of planning, and they hired planners as their consultants. So as consultants, you serve for these political leaders, and they are paid, right? So it's very difficult for planners to deviate from what you have assigned with the political leaders. I mean, you have to serve these political leaders, despite the fact that you know some of the problems and issues with the communities. So again, and it's really quite a challenging task. That's why for me personally, it's really a challenging work to work with political leaders or politicians. And it's really, really what you have to think maybe several times when a politician approach you and will tell you that I will hire you as a consultant. It's very hard.
Just a question, are planners in the Philippines, is there a professional body of some sort?
Yes, we have.
Oh,
we have.
Okay.
We have planning non-organizations who lobby for, like for example, in Congress and Senate, so they have their position papers. Like for example, we have now the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Act that recently passed late last year. And one of the specific concern is every state universities in the Philippines should have a comprehensive land use plan within 2 years. So by 2022, we should have our own master plan. And with that, like in my university, we have limited expertise to do our master plan. So we have to hire experts on this regard. And I think the School of Urban and Regional Planning of the University of the Philippines is offering seminars and trainings on this regard. But going back to what my statement earlier, that it's really quite difficult really to be involved in politics and as a planner. Again, if you really wanted to change how the community way of living, like for example, I work at Pasig River Rehabilitation Commission during the former commissioner, Gina Lopez, and it's very, very challenging work to deal with informal settlers along Pasig River. But again, go back to leadership. I think it's really more of how the leadership of the commission somehow influence, and going back to the last framework, which is empowerment, trying to put to the minds of these people that you have to own the projects, and you have to really embrace the projects along Pasig River. So again, it's really very difficult. But as I said, there are planners organization here in the Philippines who lobby. Like now, I'm also part of the environmental planner as a registered planner. So we have our society that somehow lobby in terms of legislations. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Samantha, do you have your hand raised?
I just have one thing to add about what Ronaldo mentioned. This sort of form of corruption in terms of favoring certain kinds of politics, it doesn't exist only in the global south. It exists actually, I think, even more in the global north. I spent 12 years working in the UK and Sweden, and it's very much like this as well. It's just less obvious, and it's very much still accepted, and it doesn't lead to the same place. So that's the reason why I think in some ways it's also about the system that we have in general, the governance system. And so that's why I constantly go back to leadership. It's a constant thing for me to talk about the right kinds of leadership if you're in a certain kind of position, and how do you wean yourself off of status and prestige. That's really important for me.
Great discussion. We have like 5 minutes left until we all return to the main room. So I'm not too sure if anyone wants to say anything before we close up.
Hi. Sorry, I just want to add maybe a little bit of motivation for planners and those working with the public, is that all these experiences and challenges that we face with the public in these participation with the communities and those sessions, it's something that, you know, we should also just take as building our capacity as planners and professionals, so that we are prepared or better prepared in future dealing with such situations. So it shouldn't be seen as the worst thing, but at the same time, you know, it should be a learning a learning curve, for lack of a better word. Yeah. So yeah, that's just a little bit of motivation for young planners such as myself. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know if Praveen, you want to say anything before we close and we enter the main room.
Well, I have a question for you. What do you take away from this? What do you think was the most important thing for you?
Okay, for me, I liked the aspect that was touched on in terms of a planner being an enabler and a facilitator. You know, I've also had experience with facilitation in a community meeting, and it's not an easy thing, because you really have to listen to what are the concerns that are raised and be able to represent well within the developmental space. So for me, I like the fact that planners should be enablers and facilitators and dealing with the community. And I also just want to highlight on the political issue as well, that we shouldn't be afraid to speak about it. You know, maybe that's where we need to open the platform for political engagement in terms of when we sit down and have these planning meetings. You know, your political organizations should also be a part of it, just so that they understand the directive in which planners and what we're trying to do for the community as well. We should be able to work with political leaders as well, not for them to, you know, isolate and go against each other, but we should be able to, you know, sit down in one room and really collaborate. So yeah, this was very informative discussion, mainly because as planners, we deal with people on a daily basis. Even if it's not the community itself, we also deal with key stakeholders, officials, and other planners and other built environment professions. So what we're gaining from this is we need to basically inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Yeah, and it's like 1 minute left. So thank you everyone for joining in our room. Oh, Suri, do you have a hand raise? Well, that was a clap. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.